Okay, so to install this oil cooler, we have to remove the factory 17 it up M7 heat exchanger, all the lines, everything that goes through there. It's actually not that bad to remove all this stuff. If you want to keep the heat exchanger, there's actually a union that I bought. I can't remember exactly where I got it from, maybe Improved Racing, but there's a union that connects these two, and it essentially bypasses the oil cooler, this piece here, that coolant-to-oil cooler, and we'll just let your coolant, your 17 and up heat exchanger, stay in and you know, have that additional heat exchanger for your coolant, which is and that's if you want to put an oil cooler, say, in your fenders, you know, up in the corners, and you want to keep that front heat exchanger. But because I don't have an air-to-water intercooler, I don't need that. I'm air-to-air. I don't need the additional heat exchanger. I don't need all that extra cooling because I'm only cooling my engine now. That's it. That's all I need the radiator to do, is just cool my engine. I don't need that extra cooling. So I'm going to remove everything, the front heat exchanger, and I've got a block plug that will go up in here, and I'm going to remove this line and remove all these lines, and essentially the block will just be plugged off, and it'll use a standard radiator cooler. Okay, what do we have here? So we're doing a mix of things. In the middle of putting on a new K-Tech high flow oil pump, also doing a dedicated oil cooler. I told you that I was gonna try to capture that in the entire process, and also having to pull off the front pulley. I've got an ARP crank bolt on there, so it's on there really good. So the only way to get that off, you can't hold the brakes, you can't put it in 5th gear, none of that really works. So what I had to do was just go with the crank adapter. So I'll show you that in a second. It's a little locking piece that you basically bolt up where the starter sits or mates, and it just locks the flywheel gear. So I can show you real quick where that goes, nothing to it. But the old starter, I believe, is drawing current from the battery. My battery was going dead. It's the only thing I can think of. So replacing that with a new starter. So just showing a comparison from the old starter, which really looks bad. And then here's a new GM starter. I can't remember what the price of that was, but probably a couple $100, I imagine, something like that. And then also, before I get these parts on, I said I would show the difference in the ARP versus stock crank bolt. So that's just a stock, brand new stock GM crank bolt. They stretch, so you can only use these once, and that would be an ARP 12 point with the washer, of course. It's a little bit longer, but when you put the washer on, the length works out. So the only other thing I wanted to show was how this is done. I haven't actually videoed that yet, so not very bright up under here, but you can see where the flywheel is coming in here, and right up under the back of the oil pan. You got the flywheel teeth, and all it is, I think this was made in China. In fact, they make some nicer aluminum ones, but it's just a little welded piece that essentially bolts right up there like that. I don't know if you can see that, but there's the teeth, and it just bolts up in right into the teeth, and it locks the flywheel, and that allows me to essentially put as much torque as I want without having to worry about putting stress on the transmission, clutch, any of that stuff. So you can see here where that's the main, I believe that's a 300 amp. I know it's that big fuse in the back, which I've actually replaced several times. Anytime you throw bearings at an engine or spin bearings, you blow that main fuse in the back. And that's mostly because the starter is having to work very, very hard to turn the engine over, and it just burns that fuse in the back. But that's a direct link to the back of the battery. So that's the only thing I can imagine that's pulling current, drawing current on me when the battery or the key's off. So hoping the new starter solves that issue. Because I've had some oil leakage through there, and that starter just really got old on me. And then this would be the harness for the starter that actually fires it. Just provides accessory voltage to kick the relay and solenoid on the starter. And then I've got some, there's a crank right up in here is a crank sensor. That's a crankshaft position sensor. And then over here to the other side is a knock sensor. There's a knock sensor on both sides of the engine. There's one right here, and then there's one over here on the opposing side, to listen for knock on both sides of the engine. So I've already got the oil pan off. I've just got one bolt holding it here. What I'm going to do is remove these coolant lines, which fed the 17 and up additional heat exchanger. I've got a block plug. I'm gonna close that off. And then what I'll do is I'll put the improved racing adapter right here, and that will feed the two -10 AM Fragola lines, which will run all the way up to the front where the heat exchanger will be mounted. So anyway, this is sort of the next step of where I'm at. So I wanted to get a video of that part before I got any further, and then I'll continue with the next video, which is actually getting the heat exchanger mounted up front. So one of the things that I have already done is I've got this front crossover bar. So I took a piece of just straight aluminum and basically cut some holes out on the end, bend it a little bit, and this is going to run across. And then what I'm going to do is just TIG weld sort of down here on the bottom. I'm going to TIG weld that, and then this will bend a little bit forward to a 90 degree, and then the heat exchanger is going to bolt right to the back of that. So okay, see you in the next video. Okay, let's see where we are. We're in about the second phase here of the mounting bracket system that I'm fabricating. So it first consisted of a transverse bracket, which is going to be one of the main supports for the heat exchanger, which will essentially fill up this entire bottom tray. So I wanted to make use of these two mounting points on the Procharger Intercooler. I mean, they're brilliant mount points, so I'd be crazy not to make use of that. Plus, I can't go any lower because of the math sensor right here. So I have to sort of improvise. So what I did was made this transverse bracket, and then what I did was sort of fabricated these little, you know, basically 90 degree brackets that come off of that transverse bracket, and simply TIG welded them. So you know, and they're TIGged on the side, and then I just filled in, I did a filler here on the top to get some penetration, to just basically give that little bit of extra bite for that weld. But these are aluminum. I believe I'm looking at I think that's an 1/8 inch thick aluminum bar. It's pretty thick, so it's definitely beefy, and when it's bolted up here, it becomes even stronger, and that's the point. I'm trying to make use of the mounting points, which will create the tension. You know, it'll pull basically this bar nice and tight once it's actually on there, and create some strength there. And then I've got these two mounting tabs. Like I said, they kind of bend back, and then they come down at a 90 degree angle. And then what I'm going to do is drill holes here and then mount the heat exchanger there. Okay, phase 3, I guess I would say, with the oil cooler, custom fabrication and install. So Yesterday I got the 90-degree secondary brackets TIG welded onto the main crossbar, that transverse bar that I was talking about, because when you bolt these two in over here and you bolt these two in over here, it pulls that bar super tight. I mean, this bar is absolutely very, very strong now, as a support member for that heat exchanger or oil cooler. You know, just this bar by itself, even though it's a very thick piece of aluminum, you know, on its own, it definitely can bend and all. But when you got that thing, when you have tension pulling on both sides, it really did what I intended it to do, which is strengthen the hell out of that bracket. And I'm telling you, now what I did was I took and used my drill press and drilled 2 holes through the back of the brackets and used the improved racing hardware to basically go through the back of the bracket into, just like this in the front. You've got these 2, you know, just flanges, or, you know, self-threaded little flanges that you can screw into. So they're nice and TIG welded too, so it's very cool. The only I mean, I'm just fitting right now, so nothing is complete. But one of the things I noticed is these bolts right here are way too short. I need longer bolts, because when I go through the back, I want to, number one, I want to have a washer on both sides. And then I also want a rubber washer, which I've already bought. So I don't want this directly mounted. I want there to be a little bit of shock taken out of that with the rubber washer. It won't be a whole lot, but anytime you install oil coolers and heat exchangers, they really recommend that you use vibration type you know, features added in to take out the added vibration, like rubber washers or you know, anything along those lines. Fluid dampeners. You know, the sky's the limit when you want to dampen things, right? So but now that I've got it mounted, I mean, and I don't even have all the bolts really tightened, but I mean, this thing, I mean, you can see the bolts aren't even tight on the back, but when I press on that, I mean, I'm pressing hard. Like, that thing is really, 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 it's on there. It's not going anywhere. And that, I was very pleased to see how strong just 2 mount points in the back made with that crossbar. You know, TIG welding, you know, all the way around, it does add some more strength there, versus, you know, bolting everything together. Bolts would be fine, but it's a much cleaner setup, just TIG welding. You know, I still got plenty of airflow through here. Like, the majority of my Procharger, you can see, I mean, is right there. There's the bottom. The majority of my Procharger now gets plenty of airflow. I mean, all the way to the top. And I'm almost questioning leaving that crossbar intact and not drilling some holes. I may drill, you know, just a few holes, but I'm not sure that I want to do that, because the more that I look at this, and of course I don't have a wind tunnel, you know, I use a lot of common sense when it comes to this kind of stuff, but I like, if you look at that, it's angled. I've got a nice angle on this that meets the same angle of attack that the Procharger Intercooler is at. So Procharger is not a vertical angle, right? It's turned down possibly 30 degrees, maybe 25 degrees. And that's great, because that air hits that, and then it also creates sort of a, you know, a compression point towards it. You know, the air wants to now kind of work its way down, and that's great, because what I'm going to do is, underneath this heat exchanger, I'm going to cut these ribs out. These ribs don't need to be here. And then I'm going to open up a ton of airflow underneath this front under fascia here. So that way, as the air flows through here, it's going to come in. A lot of it's going to go through the intercooler. A lot's going to go through this 17 and up
Z06 port, right? I think the 15s may have them too. But if you notice, that's a nice clean shot directly to the radiator and condenser. So, so your intercooler doesn't block all of the airflow. I'm not sure if a lot of people knew that, but you do get a lot of direct airflow through these holes right to your radiator and your condenser. So, so that's great. But as that air comes in, it's going to go through the intercooler. A lot of it's going to work its way down. But I also know this air is going to hit this bar, and it's going to create a little bit of turbulence, but the bar is angled. So that air is going to want to hit this, diffuse a little bit, and then make its way through the bottom there of those remaining 2 channels on that intercooler. And also, this is kind of a like a windbreak, right? So as the air hits it, it will allow the air to kind of build up and slow down a little bit, where the negative pressure effect can pull the air down through the oil cooler, which is great because I'm going to have a lot of holes drilled underneath here. And as you're going, the faster you go, you're going to create like a negative suction effect under the heat exchanger. So I'm hoping that is the case and all of this works. So I don't know if I'm going to drill holes yet in that bar. I may or may not. I'll have to sleep on that. The only other thing is I'm going to do a fitment of the bumper, make sure everything clears properly. I purposely offset the heat exchanger a little bit this way so I can run the Fragola lines, the negative 10 AN lines through here without any binding. I can have a nice sort of, you know, just very forgiving angle on there, even though I have some 90s that come off here, you know, that kind of will allow me to shoot through there, or 45s, I believe. But, you know, that'll give me a nice, just a nice bend, a nice curve. You never really want, you know, sharp bends with bent hoses or anything like that. So, the final thing is, yes, this has actually turned out to be extremely strong. I'm extremely impressed. Behind the bumper, this thing is not going anywhere. I mean, and once I bolt it in there tight, it's actually very, very secure. So I'm not entirely sure what I want to do for added support. I may take one more, and I got to think this through, but I've got 2 more mount points here, but I've got to be careful because the bumper covers this. So I may take and fabricate some type of, you know, I honestly don't even know where I'm going to go with this. I don't want to have a bar that's going straight up, you know, from here to here. I think that'd be tacky, and it's also going to, you know, cause turbulence there in front of the intercooler. I really want all that to be nice and clean. Let me back out a little bit, and you'll see. I mean, that looks wonderful. I mean, it's just amazing how well that has turned out. I'm very, very happy with just the fitment, you know, how all of this turned out. But I don't know if I need to add some more supports. And there's not much underneath here. I could come down, you know, like just, you know, like an L bracket here, come down and shoot under and maybe tie to the frame. But again, I'm going to be then blocking, you know, some of the fins underneath. So I don't know. I've got this piece over here on the frame. So what I could do is come off here, do a sharp bend, and then tie it into this piece here. You know, kind of just one of these numbers and come on over. I just need to fit the bumper on, see what I'm working with, and also just kind of, you know, bolt this up really tight and see how strong it is. Because once the bumper, like I said, once you get the bumper on here, everything is gonna, you know, it's not gonna move. It's gonna be nice and snug. It's not gonna be able to bounce around. Everything is gonna be, you know, really sort of keeping it nice and tight with all the bumper accessories and stuff all around it. So, and I did also create other brackets that come off of here, and they come around here and they do a 90, and then they fold over the top of this. So that is going to basically allow the airflow to go hit this corner and curve the air right in. And these are from Procharger. A lot of people put them in and they're just flimsy. They're not really, I mean, look at this. Nobody really does anything very well with these. A lot of people probably dump them, but I really want to fix this and you know, and do a very, very good setup. Even though I'm selling the car, which it's like, man, why am I going all this extra mile for this? But I really enjoy doing this stuff. I love the challenge of it. So anyway, what I was talking about was this bracket here that I've got in my hand will mount on the same two off the intercooler here, right? And you see that tab? That tab is going to fold over 90 degrees. And it's going to fold right over on the top of this wind deflector, right? And what I'm going to do is just bolt that in. There's already holes there. I'll drill a, you know, if I have to sort of maybe put another hole there, I can. But that's going to mount right on there like that. And that's going to give it actually a lot of strength. I mean, look at all the surface of that carbon steel, right? It's going to be mounted right on top of that. So that's going to really, you know, hold that in place pretty well. Same thing for the other side. So there's the two pieces. I've just got to fold them over, and then we'll be in good shape. But any feedback I would appreciate. Anybody done these? Anybody have any sort of feedback on, you know, maybe should I mount? Should I add, you know, should I come off of here with another bracket and come around? Because here, see, I'm going to have a hose coming off, an AN fitting, so I've got to come over and then clear that fitting. So there's, you know, there's some challenges. And another thing is this intercooler, I've got it right now where it kind of, you can see it's got a lot of clearance between the back of the Procharger, and I did that because I wanted to get as much airflow back there as possible. But this is aluminum. I can heat this up a little bit and easily just push this back and get, you know, go back maybe another ½ inch, 3/4 of an inch. And I may have to do that because right now, if you look, I'm right there with the front of the bumper, so I might have to do some internal trimming to get that to fit. But regardless, first shot, first design, I'm extremely pleased with how this came out. So yeah, any feedback, greatly appreciated. Things can always be looked at with a different perspective, and very curious to see what others have done or any other ideas, because you know, this is going to be my main oil cooler. There will be no more oil to water cooler set up in this LT4. Dumping that, going with the improved racing 200 degree built-in thermo billet oil adapter block. So right off the engine, as soon as the oil hits 200 degrees, it's going to start flowing through this oil cooler here. And I got a Holley secondary oil pressure sensor right on that billet block, and that's going to run over behind the engine and tie into the ECU, which will give me the secondary oil pressure reading on my Holley 3.5 touchscreen. And that's great because I'll now be able to monitor oil pressure down low in the bottom of the engine. And then the other oil pressure sensor is right there. You see that fitting and those wires coming off. That's the oil pressure sensor for the dash cluster. And that's at the very top. That's after it makes its way all through all the, you know, bearings and, you know, crankshaft, camshaft, everything. So it'd be nice to see oil pressure sort of pre and post like that. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and post this, guys. And you know, I know it's not a video of me really wrenching or doing anything, but I just wanted to show you sort of what I got. And shouts out to the you know, the AHP, the Alpha TIG 201XD. I haven't really had a chance to use it a whole lot, but there's tons of people on YouTube and other areas, welders, that love this machine. You know, I'm a hobbyist. I don't weld every day, but you know, pure argon, it is an excellent TIG machine. Of course, you can stick weld with it as well. I've got a Lincoln MIG, you know, a wire fed gun. But I love TIG welding. I think it's a much cleaner and definitely much more well suited for this type of stuff. especially aluminum. So, all right, guys, let me know what you think. And if you, you know, want to get notifications, hit the bell, all that good stuff, you know the drill. And I will see you later. All right, so I'm going to do a little quick video of installing this Improved Racing. This is a, it's like a billet, 200 degree built-in thermo with, it's got an extra port for Holley oil pressure adapter. I'll talk about that in just a second. And then an in and an out for a dedicated oil cooler line. So I'm going to do the install here with the oil pan off, just kind of quickly show you a little bit about it, and do the install, walk you through a little bit, and then show you kind of what I've got on the car so far. And maybe this will help if anyone wants to go down this path, removing the factory oil cooler setup and going with a dedicated setup. So I'm zoomed in on right where I need to be, and I will go ahead and start the install here. It's really straightforward, but I want to talk about it and you know, just kind of guide you through a little bit about it while I'm doing it myself. So one of the things you want to make sure is you get that surface really clean. I used wire brush. Also, getting the oil pan surface clean is really key. When you pull this oil pan off, you've got that Gm sealant is just a bitch to get off. I use sealant remover, and I use a pressure washer to get everything clean, and then I use a wire brush, and I go in the direction so that any of the scuff marks, you know, they're at least cross-haired, or they're in the direction where, you know, it won't leak. The seal will actually get a good bind on the seal there. And that GM sealant, you want it to be a little rough, you know, a little rough. It actually, you know, it binds just like any glue, right? Binds to a rough surface. You want to scuff it up a little bit. So one of the things I'm doing, since I have the oil pan off, I'll show you some stuff later, but the torque sequence, by the way, on this, you want to start in the middle, as everyone knows, and then kind of work your way out. When you get to the end, you want to go to one corner, and then you want to go to the other front corner on the other side, crisscross pattern. And then you got these two rear long bolts. Don't forget those long bolts because they add that torque right up here in the back area of the oil pan, so that's pretty critical. All right, so let's put this billet piece on from Improved Racing. I'm going to put some blue Loctite on the threads here. So I have already seated the Holley oil pressure sensor. I've already seated that, and I use some thread sealant, and that essentially, instead of pipe tape, I like thread sealant, and that will keep everything nice and sealed. No worries there. This gasket goes one way on this, and you can see, like, you know, the shape of it follows the shape of this flange here, this mounting point. So it's pretty straightforward. You just want to make sure that you've got that right. And it's also easier to mount this pan with this billet sensor on here. So I'm going to do all that ahead of time. And let me get it started here. You want to get it started on both sides. And then once you get it started, you can just make sure everything looks right, and then just walk it down to where it seats. Yep, seats on there nice, and just tighten this down by hand. This is aluminum. It's billet, of course, but you know, cut out of one chunk of aluminum, but you still want to be careful with aluminum threads. And these are stainless cap screws, similar to these. They send you with these sort of cap screws, socket cap screws, what they're called. stainless. So, okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to torque this down. It doesn't require a ton of torque, but we're going to tighten it down equally. It's also important. Make sure you get it nice. You don't want it too tight. These are aluminum threads, so you know, I look like I might be struggling here, but I'm not. All right, there you go. Okay, so I went ahead and put the oil filter on because it makes sense. That way I can just throw the pan up. I don't have to worry about installing all of this stuff up in there where it's super tight with the headers, long tube headers, all of that. It's going to be a breeze now. I've already ran the harness down through. All I got to do is mount the oil pan, slip the harness on. So let's give you a shot. Let me take the camera out and I will. Okay, now we have got it installed, and I will give you a little bit more angles here of this billet oil cooler adapter. Sorry, I've said this so many times now, but there's your out port, negative 10 AN, and there's your in port right there, negative 10 AN. And this replaces that entire assembly, of course, with, this is the stock setup, you know, a coolant-to-oil setup, and it's back up in there, of course, but you know, you know what that looks like. It's a huge assembly. Water coolant comes from the block, routes through it, comes out, and it actually routes to the front of a 17 plus heat exchanger, and then it goes to the radiator and then back around. So that's sort of the route. So what I've done here is, and I told you I was going to give you more video here, I've actually took the 3-pass improved racing oil cooler, fabricated brackets. I mean, really, you know, I took my time and did a really good job. Brackets for the air deflectors, for the Procharger. I actually made those nice and strong. I TIG welded and built this nice aluminum bracket assembly. You can see here, I even went around the side and used some stainless socket cap screws, bolted that up, and you can, I mean, if I backed up, you can see, I mean, it shakes the whole car. Like, this thing is as solid mount as it can be. And for the negative pressure flow, I drilled a series of holes underneath, with this thing, honestly, tucked right, look at that, tucked right up to the oil cooler, which is great. So front bumper fits perfectly, no trimming. I mean, it just turned out beautiful. And that air now goes right through, and it's actually going to hit my entire Procharger intercooler for the first time. The factory 17 cooler sat higher. I'm not sure why I guess they weren't expecting a Procharger intercooler behind it, so it makes sense. But it blocked a good quarter of the bottom part of my Procharger intercooler, so that was really bad. And also, these brackets here were used to mount the heat exchanger. So you can see how much higher, look at that. I mean, this is how much higher it was. It sat up here where that bar was. So I lowered it to make more, you know, more use of the airflow, which is great. And then, of course, you've got these two ducts. I think these are in later models. I'm not quite sure. But these two ducts flow directly straight through to the radiator and the condenser. So it goes through and it actually misses the Procharger. Procharger intercooler stops right here. So we've got airflow to the condenser radiator. Now we have full flow of air to this Procharger intercooler, which is great. First time ever. And now I've got this huge 3-pass oil cooler dedicated setup. I don't have any more air to water like intercoolers. It's a Procharger with air to air. And now I don't have the coolant cooling the oil either. So now I can get away with removing that extra heat exchanger for coolant because I don't need it anymore. I just, I don't have to cool down the air for the supercharger, and I don't have to cool down the oil. So now I don't need all that extra capacity. That the radiator is actually just plenty. In fact, I never really had any overheating problems, but now I made good use of those heat exchanger brackets. I modified them, and you can see there's 2 mounting points up in there on the Procharger. So I made good use of that, and I used the heat exchanger mounts and sort of fabricated them to where now I bolt down these deflectors. So at high speed, now that air is going to get routed right into the Procharger, and these were just flimsy before. I mean, there was nothing to really mount them to well. So it was really sort of half-ass, I'll be honest with you. So I'm extremely happy how all of this turns out. We're going to get airflow in. The Procharger's angled down, so we're going to get some pressure being pushed downward. But we've got this negative pressure effect. I believe the ZR1 even has the same sort of deal with holes underneath. They're not circles, but it's got a airfoil like that, or air dam. But you'll get that as air flows under, it's going to suck down. So you're going to get a nice negative pressure effect on this, which is great. And I've got a straight fitting, -10. I've got a 90, which curves around. And you can see here, nice. I mean, that's the thing. You don't want any kinks. And these are nice bends. This is Fragola lines with custom heat wrapping and protection. So I don't have to worry about, any kind of like rubbing or any of that. Of course, I'm going to, make sure all that's taken care of. There is a brake duct here. I need it out of the way, and I kind of have this a little loose because in there is where I need to tighten my T-bolt clamp for my Procharger piping. My bypass valve goes down in there. So let me show you where the lines run. The lines will come around. There's my Procharger inlet right there. And then of course you got radiator. So there's a lot of stuff kind of going on right here. In fact, you can see this is the setup here. And it's when you do it enough, it's not that bad. I got to be careful here with the radiator fins. But, man, at first this was a bitch to figure out. But, now I've got it down. This will, once the sway bar, you can see it's pushed back a little bit. The rack is pushed back because I've got this new K-Tech oil pump on. I put a new timing change tensioner. The GM oil pump actually had the five rear screws loose on the oil pump. So now I found out where I was losing oil pressure. The oil pump was coming apart, and that's scary. So anyway, this time around, not taking any chances. I've more than triple checked every bolt. I put a brand new tensioner in there. I reset the timing to make sure that the timing is correct. Because this is that LME. So this is the LS3 sprocket that's been modified for the timing offset, so you can set it perfectly with the, the dot to dot. You don't have to worry about the offset. So the key is getting those oil lines, dedicated oil lines, right? Because they're pretty big, routed, anyway, nothing here moves. The only thing I have to worry about is the steering rack. That moves a little bit there, but the lines run right down the side of the engine block, well below the headers. So I don't have to worry about any heat. The only catch is just right through here. But once I tighten all this up and get everything sort of routed, the lines will make sense. I'll route them through exactly where they need to be. And, I've got some stainless ties where I'll, you know, tighten this stuff down where it needs to be, where it doesn't move, and you know, we'll be good to go. So anyway, I am at the point, which is great, where I'm about to put the oil pan back on. So now I've got a nice dedicated oil cooler bracket or assembly on, whatever you want to call it, which you know, you've got these two lines, right? And one is the in, one is the out, and of course, you know, this would be the in, right? Coming in, because it actually comes to here and then flows this way, goes this way, flows. It's a triple pass. You know, in fact, I'm not quite even sure if there is a right direction for that, but I'm going to check that just to make sure, you know, if there is. I don't think there is, but on triple pass, there may be a more efficient way for it to flow. I just want to make sure. You know, there's always stuff you can learn, right? I want to make sure I'm doing that right. But regardless, very, very cool how this has worked out. I got the length of the lines actually, I guessed perfectly. I don't know how I ended up doing that, but I did have to change one fitting from a 90 to a straight, because I ended up mounting this a little bit differently than I wanted. But now I'm going to throw the oil pan on, and the trick is making sure you get that. There is a harness right here for the oil flow control valve. That's a bypass valve on the oil pump. You want to make sure you hook that up with the front cover first. So I'll take the front cover, which is that billet front cover. Let's see if I can find that real quick, because I'm going to need that in just a second. It's in this box here. And yep, there's the harness I was talking about. So that harness will go to that oil flow control valve or solenoid right there. And then once I get that on, then I can actually mount the oil pan. So I'll have this sort of zip tied and hanging. When the oil pan is mounted, then I'll actually tighten down the this billet front cover. And there's a new LS. This is actually an LS seal, which is a little bit stronger than the LT seal. I've had the LT seal actually blow on me and sprayed oil everywhere. So the LT seal seems to be holding up. I'm at 25 pounds of boost and have not had any problems blowing the seal, but I am with a better open PCV system. So, anyway, I've got all that cleaned up, and I've got the surface of the oil pan brushed, and now it's just time to apply the Gm sealant here in a minute and then get the oil pan on there. So and of course the other and this needs to be done first as well, is getting, you know, getting the balancer, the crank bolt. You got two. There's a whole process with that, using the old bolt first and then using a new ARP bolt, torquing to like 170 foot-pounds, backing her up 360 degrees, torquing to 56, and then doing 200-degree pass. So with the crank bolt, you're going to need something like this to give you, and it's like an angle meter essentially, to give you the right amount of torque. But this is the final assembly here. So I told you I would have a video on that, and here it is. And I'll get one more video with everything complete and the engine running.